Hello, hello, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you happen to be. This is Haley Gray, and I'm joining you from beautiful, sunny Miami, Florida. And we have a guest on the line today, and this is Kevin Israel, and he is a fantastic business attorney and a dear friend of mine. And he's going to talk to us today about some of the legal matters you need to know about when you're starting your business. Um, and if you would like to go ahead and type in the chat box over there where you're from and any questions you may have as we go along, I would appreciate it. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Kevin.
Okay, great. Thank you, Haley. Looks like we've got some people mostly from North Carolina on here. I wasn't sure where people would be from. And obviously, whenever you're doing any kind of presentation like this, everything that you say is very state specific. I'm going to talk about business entity selection for the most part, what the different types of businesses entity options are for your small business. And if we have some time at the end, maybe also talk about a few basic startup legal issues. But I want you to understand that this is very much so high level. We're not going to be talking about the minutia of getting your business started. But if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them in relation to getting your business going. So as an initial disclaimer, obviously being an attorney, that's what I do. See if I can change the slides here. Okay, looks like we're on the last slide, so I'm going to start from the beginning. Okay, so as a disclaimer, like I said, this is very much so a general overview of the topic. It's not meant to be specific to any one person or any one business. So if you have any specific legal questions, make sure you talk to an attorney in your area. Make sure you're talking to somebody that is familiar with your local laws, because they are going to vary across states. And make sure you have a team of people that you can work with early on. That includes your accountant, your insurance, your business attorney, all the people that would be very important to making sure that you're well protected as a business owner. So we're going to talk about a few different items today. First, why incorporate? Why not? People seem to think that there is only one option there. Let's incorporate. But for some people, it may be more beneficial just to stay as a sole proprietorship. But those people are few and far between, and we're going to talk a lot more about that as we go along. So then we're going to talk about the different entity types. The main ones we're going to talk about today are corporations, LLCs, and sole proprietorships. There are other entities in other states. There's a certain kinds of general partners and limited partners. They're going to limit your liability, but for the most part, our presentation is going to focus on corporations, LLCs, and sole proprietorships. And then we're also going to talk about piercing the corporate veil. So we've created this entity, but when can somebody get past this entity and get to my personal assets? And there are definitely opportunities to do that. So if you're going to spend the time and spend the money to create the entity, you want to make sure that you're able to actually gain the benefits of that entity, which means preventing people from actually piercing the corporate veil and getting to you as an individual. The major issues that are going to determine whether or not you select a corporation, an LLC, or stay as a sole proprietorship are first, operations, and second, taxation. So I know we have some CPAs and accountants on the line. I think they would be well advised to, you'd be well advised to speak with them as well, but taxation is going to be very important in making your business entity decision. And then finally, if we have some additional time, I'm just going to briefly glance over other legal issues that startup businesses face. And then if there are any questions at the end, I'm happy to answer them. So whenever we talk about entity selection, people always a lot of times refer to let's get incorporated, but there's much more than incorporation. There's proprietorship, there's partnership, there's limited liability, and then of course there is the corporation. If you're forming an LLC, then you're going to be organizing it. The terminology that you're going to be using is organization. For a corporation, you're going to be incorporating. But as I mentioned previously, the main issues we're going to discuss today are limited liability companies, corporations, and sole proprietorships. So let's think about what you as a business do on a day-to-day basis. Now, if you are a sole proprietorship and you have a company that is transacting business, then oftentimes you are entering into contracts every single day. Whether you know it or not, you're entering into contracts. And these contracts can be implicitly entered into. And any time you are operating as a sole proprietorship, the liability for all of those contracts is coming back to you as an individual. So you need to understand that as your business grows, you are going to be exposing yourself to more and more liability. And a lot of people say to me, well, I'm very early on. I'm not sure if I'm exposing myself to that much liability. But the reality is you often are. If you are entering into any kind of lease agreement, if you have employees and those employees are going out and transacting business on your behalf, then you are entering into a situation where you're potentially exposing yourself to liability. If you have partners, you're liable to your partner on a personal basis. Additionally, if you ever get sued for anything that you're doing, then you are going to have that liability attached to you as an individual for quite some time. Well, sometimes people say to me, well, I don't have a whole lot of assets to my name right now. Well, you need to understand that if a company gets a judgment against you as an individual, then that judgment is not going to go away. That judgment can last as long as the statute of limitations for receiving that judgment, and sometimes that can be 10 years. So if you have assets now, or if you plan to have assets in the future, which hopefully running a small business you will, then you understand that from day one you are exposing yourself to liability. Now, if we form an LLC or a corporation, then what we're doing is we're removing the U in the center and replacing it with the LLC or with the corporation. So then if you have any kind of liabilities, the first option and the only option, generally speaking, for getting payment on those liabilities for a creditor or for a judgment holder is going to be to look to your LLC or to your corporation. So you are significantly diminishing your liabilities by simply forming that entity very early on. So as you see here with the LLC and the same with the corporation, anytime you have any kind of liability, they are looking to the company and not to you. And that is what we want as business people. We want to try to limit our liability and our exposure as much as possible. If you think about a business owner, for the most part, we are risk takers. We understand that we have to take calculated risk, and not all the time are we going to be successful with every endeavor that we take. But we don't want to preclude our ability to be successful in the future by essentially attaching all of these liabilities to us as a person. So if you have this corporation, if you have this LLC, and it doesn't work out, you can close down and you can start anew without the liabilities that ordinarily would attach indefinitely. So this is a good graph that shows what would happen if, for the most part, one of these liabilities would try to come after you as an individual. You'd be able to deflect them. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about some opportunities for the liability holder to get to you as an individual, but for the most part, by default, these companies and these individuals who have liability, or you have liabilities and they have judgments or liens against you, against your business, they're going to be looking at the business and not at you personally. So let's talk about a few different examples of when things go wrong. So as an initial matter, a lot of times people say, well, I have insurance. Insurance is great. I highly recommend having insurance. But the nature of insurance is that they don't want to pay out. Their business model works whenever they limit the payouts as much as possible. And the way they do that is by having exclusions in the policy. So there are many, many ways where you can get outside that policy. And in addition, your policy is going to have certain caps. And if you are exposing yourself to liability outside those caps, then you can expect that they're going to reach the business or you personally if you don't have an entity in place. So a huge liability for many small businesses are the employees. If you have an employee who goes out and is transacting business on your behalf, then you as a business are liable for what they're doing. I have an example of a client that has a home tutoring business, and they send individuals into the homes to work with students. Now, this is a huge liability. You're sending somebody that maybe you've interviewed, vetted a couple times into somebody else's home, and oftentimes the supervision of those individuals is very minimal. Now, if somebody does something to the student, or if for some reason the student even alleges that that person has done something to them, then you as a business are liable for their actions. Additionally, if you have debts, if you have business debts, then those debts are going to attach to you as an individual or to the business, depending on how you're structured, how you're organized, indefinitely, as long as they're continued on by the proper court processes, and we're not going to get too far into that, but those debts can attach to your business in the future. So as an example, I have a client that had a debt that was outstanding from another state for about $50,000. And with that debt, they tried to come after the business 10 years later because the business had moved out of state, and they said, well, you moved out of state, there was this debt, the interest has continued to accrue, and now we're going to come after you individually. Now, this person had an LLC, they were properly organized, and they were able to show that that LLC from out of state had been dissolved and they had reorganized under another LLC from their new state. So they were able to completely remove liability because of the fact that they had that LLC in place. Also, a lot of times we're conducting business online now, which means that we are exposing ourselves with a lot of what we do. If you think about it, we're advertising the businesses that we do, and if we're not being careful with how we're advertising, we can potentially engage in intellectual property infringement. And I've seen that over and over and over again with my clients who have gone out there and taken a quote that they think is interesting, taken a picture, taken anything that they think would be beneficial to their business, post it online. The next thing you know, they're receiving a cease and desist letter and a demand for payment from an entity saying that you are liable for what you posted. And these are not $100, $200 demands or payment. These are thousands of dollars, and they can really add up fast. So I want you to think about what opportunities you have to shield yourselves from liability by organizing properly and making sure that when things go wrong, you're compartmentalizing as much as possible your liability, that you're not exposing your entire business to the liability. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about sole proprietorships, corporations, and LLCs. Now let's talk first about sole proprietorships and what the advantages and disadvantages of a sole proprietorship. Now, first of all, if you're a sole proprietor, you are a sole proprietor by default. You don't have to file any kind of articles of organization or articles of incorporation with the Secretary of State or with your state governing bodies. And this means that you also do not have to pay your annual reports. And annual reports are a couple $100 depending on the state that you're in, and that can add up for a small business. But at the same time, because you don't have these organizational formalities, you are able to transact business a little more simply. This also means that you can make decisions more informally. If you decide that you want to buy a $20,000 piece of equipment, you can just go out and do that. You don't have to get approval from your board, or you don't have to pass resolutions saying that you are deciding to go that route. Also, if you're doing business in multiple states, then usually you have to qualify your LLC or corporation in those other states. So if I have a North Carolina business and I'm doing some business down in Florida where Haley is, then I have got to qualify, which means registering that business with the Secretary of State in that location before I can get the protections of the LLC in that state. So you don't have to do that. So you have a little bit less of the formalities going through that process. Also, when you're a sole proprietor, you're taxed at the individual level. So if you have profits, if you have losses, they all go straight to your personal income taxes, and your tax filings are a little more simple compared to some other entities. But the disadvantages, and they are huge, is unlimited liability for the owner. If you think about it, any of the previous contracts we discussed, any of the previous liabilities, they are going to directly attach to you as an individual. You may have this business and everything, and everybody knows you as XYZ business, but in reality, the business is you as an individual. And this applies also if you are a partnership that is not registered with the state. If it's just two sole proprietors that come together to form a partnership, and you're not any kind of limited liability partnership or any kind of other entity that shields liability, then you are exposing yourself to unlimited liability for you as the owner. Now, in some states, also the business it's going to terminate whenever you die. If the business is you, then it's going to terminate. So if you have a business that you want to pass on from generation to generation, that's going to be very difficult. No opportunity to utilize equity capital contributed by others. So if you think about it, if you need a loan and you want to go out to somebody and sell a portion of your business, or you want to give them a portion of your business in exchange for money so you can transact the business, then you can't sell a piece of you. So it makes it very difficult. Also, we'll discuss a little bit more down the road, but you are going to be paying self-employment taxes in addition to income taxes, and those can be pretty significant. Okay, so now let's talk about the corporation. So corporation is a option in every state throughout the United States. So there's limited personal liability for all the shareholders of a corporation. You are only liable up to the amount of money that you actually contributed into the company. So if there is if there is a business debt, then the business is liable, but you are not. Also, it's very adaptable in terms of the needs of the business. You can structure equity compensation for your employees, so that way you can incentivize them to do well by giving them a portion of your business, and you can do that through vested options or restricted stock purchase agreements. It's easy to transfer shares. All you're doing is saying, I'm going to sell you a portion of my company, 100 shares, 1,000 shares, and you're going to place the value of what those shares are and sell that to an individual. Also, whenever you have business income, that's taxed at a corporate rate, which is generally much lower than the personal rate. So that's good for the business. And there's also opportunities for flexible financing. If you want to receive a bank loan or convertible debt, then you can go through the process much more easily with the corporation. And if you think about what makes a corporation, it's the fact that you have certain organizational requirements. You are required to have articles of organization in North Carolina. You're required to have bylaws. You're required to pass anything that you do by resolution. And the way this sometimes helps businesses is it keeps them organized. It keeps things clearly distinct between what is personal and what is business. And that can be a benefit to companies, especially companies that are new. So it's a detriment in that you actually have to keep those formalities in order to have the protection of a corporation, but it is a benefit in that you are keeping yourself more organized as a business. So some of the disadvantages, you have to qualify in every state that you do business in. There are regular reporting requirements to the government, both in terms of taxes and annual reports. And there are some securities laws that you're going to run into. If you're trying to sell off shares of your company, you can't do a sell of you can't sell shares unless you are understanding what the implications are both at the federal and state level. And there are significant securities issues that you should discuss with your business attorney if you are considering selling shares of your company. Finally, a disadvantage is there's double taxation. If you think about it, the corporation is paying taxes at the corporate rate, but also whenever you receive income from the business, you're paying taxes at your individual rate as well. So essentially, there's double taxation there. And as I mentioned previously, there are requirements for maintaining a corporation. You cannot simply have a corporation and treat it like a sole proprietorship. You have to do things like holding an annual meeting. You're required to have board authorization for corporate actions. You must keep corporate funds separate from your personal funds. You must maintain complete and proper records for the corporation, and you need to have an arm's length relationship between the corporation and any of your principal stockholders. So what this means is that you need to treat the corporation as if it is a completely separate entity, and it is. It is not you. So that means that you must understand what the requirements are for your individual state in terms of maintaining that corporation. So next we have the LLC. So the LLC is going to provide the limited liability for its members that we're looking for, but the formalities are not going to be as heightened. For an LLC, the formalities are going to be that you as a company must file annual reports with the Secretary of State. Depending on how you're taxed, you must have certain reporting requirements, but you're not required to have resolutions. In fact, for an LLC in North Carolina, you're not even required to have an operating agreement. For most LLCs, that's hugely important. I highly recommend you having one anyway, because that structures the relationship of your company with you and your business partners, or you as an individual. But in North Carolina, it is not required. Also, you have the flow-through taxation, so you get to avoid some of the double taxation issues that we previously discussed for corporations. So an LLC is what the IRS considers to be a disregarded entity by default. Now that means that any profits or losses of the company, they are going to pass directly to your personal income taxes. So you're treating it sort of like a sole proprietorship in that it's going to your personal income taxes, but you're getting the limited liability. And another benefit of the LLC is that the formation is relatively easy. It's not that difficult to actually get the business up and running. You don't have to have as many documents as I mentioned, but it's a huge advantage. And for many small businesses, the LLC is going to be the route that you're going to go. The disadvantages, like I mentioned, you're going to have the regular reporting. You're going to have to pay your annual reports. Certain contracts can be more difficult to structure under the LLC, but the line between what is and what is not allowable under an LLC is getting blurred as more and more states are allowing the LLC to essentially function like a corporation. Also, with the LLC, traditionally, it was difficult to structure multiple classes of equity if you want to, say, for example, have voting and non-voting classes. But for many states, and in North Carolina, for example, we can structure an LLC to have multiple unit classes to allow for varying opportunities for the different unit holders to have different rights and responsibilities and rights to profits and losses under the LLC structure. So the LLC is becoming more and more adaptable to the individual needs of your business. Also, for an issue that you need to consider as your company grows is that the limited liability statutes do have some variation from state to state. They have not been around as long as corporations. So what this means for you as a business is that you need to understand that if you're transacting business in multiple states, then you might not have the same level of protection with an LLC as compared to a corporation. So these are some of the issues you need to consider for your individual circumstances whenever you're working with your business attorney to get started. So next here, a lot of people come and they want to say, I want to be an S Corp. An S Corp is not an entity designation in most states. In North Carolina, it is not an entity designation. You cannot go to the Secretary of State and register as an S Corp. You register as either a corporation or a limited liability company. And then an S Corp is a tax election. So we're going to do an S Corp election separate from the actual incorporation or organization. Now, why would you want to elect S Corp status? Because it allows the owner to eliminate self-employment taxes for a certain portion of their income. And those self-employment taxes can be quite significant, 15%, and that changes from year to year depending on the federal government. But it can be quite significant. So by electing S Corp status, what we're going to do is you're going to take a portion of your income as a salary, and the remainder will be a distribution. For that salary portion, you're going to be taxed as personal income, and you're also going to be paying that self-employment tax. But for the distribution, it's going to go to your personal income tax, and you're going to be paying personal income taxes on that distribution, but you will not be paying self-employment taxes. So how do you qualify as an S Corp, and who is able to be considered to be an S Corp? So for an S Corp, the corporation must have no more than 100 stockholders, all of whom are individuals. Also, your stockholders cannot be foreign citizens. They cannot be non-resident aliens. In addition, the corporation must have only one class of stock. So what this means is that for many high-tech companies, for many startup companies, the S corporation is not going to be an option because they're going to be looking at having multiple classes of equity. And if they're looking to get any kind of venture capital in the future, then usually those venture capitalists, those angel investors, they're going to come in and they're going to want preferred stock. And the S Corp election is not going to allow for that. So you're going to have difficulty if you elect S Corp status for a high-tech, high-growth company. Additionally, if you have founders or members of your company who are not citizens, then you are precluded from qualifying as an S Corp. So I want to go over a couple examples of the benefits of an S Corp election. Now, these examples are just quick examples that I put together, but it's an example of how an S Corp can save you money. So let's say, for example, your business has $200,000 of income. Once you look at all of your expenses and your other deductions, you have $100,000 of expenses and deductions. So now you have $100,000 of taxable income. So if you have $100,000 of taxable income and you're single, a rough estimate of how much you would be paying in federal taxes is $18,219. And this is personal income taxes. In addition, you are going to be paying employment taxes. Now, if you are employed by somebody else, then usually you are paying half of those employment taxes and your employer is paying the other half. But if you are a sole proprietor, if you are an LLC, then you are going to be paying both halves of those self-employment taxes. And those can be quite significant. So as you see here, after taxes, your take-home income is about $67,651. And these numbers are going to vary again because this is just a snapshot of what taxes may be at any given point in time. But as you all know, taxes can change and they depend heavily on what state you're in. Now, if you are an LLC or a corporation with the S Corp election, then you're going to take a portion of your salary, a portion of the income, the $100,000 income, as a salary, and the remaining amount as a distribution. Now, under that scenario, your employment taxes, as you see, are significantly reduced here. And what this means for you as an individual is that you can make that election and have some savings there. So here, for example, under this scenario, you have a potential of $5,652 in savings. Now, this might not seem a whole lot of money, but if you think about it over a 10-year, 20-year period, this can add up quite significantly. And this can be a real benefit to you as a business owner as you're trying to conserve as much capital as you can and continue to grow your business. Now, the issue and the question that I get from a lot of people is they come and say, well, if I have to pay self-employment taxes on the $60,000, what if I just eliminated that $60,000 and I took the entire $100,000 as a distribution? That is not a good idea because under the statute, you are not allowed to do that. You must take a reasonable salary. And what is a reasonable salary is going to be something that you're going to have a conversation with your CPA about what is reasonable for your individual industry. And that's going to vary significantly. What is reasonable for an attorney is quite significantly different than what is reasonable for a restaurant owner, or what is reasonable for somebody that has a small business where they're selling goods, some kind of clothing store, for example. So you need to understand what is reasonable for your individual industry and take a salary based on that amount. So S Corp, as I mentioned previous, is a taxation issue. You can elect S Corp taxation as either an LLC or a corporation. So what this means is that you can potentially get the best of both worlds. If you determine that the LLC is going to be the best entity for you because you don't want to deal with the formalities of maintaining that corporate status, passing things by resolution, having your bylaws, trying to make sure that everything is done very much so of record and through consent of you and your board members, then you can take the LLC, you can reclassify it as a corporation for tax statuses, and then elect the S Corp taxation. So you essentially are getting the best of both worlds, and the S Corp taxation can be applied to either entity. And I want you to understand that because sometimes CPAs will push you towards the corporation because it's easy to just immediately elect S Corp status. But that is not your only option. An LLC can have an S Corp election, and for many, many small businesses who are not going to properly maintain that corporate status, the LLC with the S Corp election is going to be the best option for them. So the final issue that I want to talk about a little bit is piercing the corporate veil. So we have talked about the benefits that you're going to get from having an LLC, having a corporation, as compared to a sole proprietorship. But these benefits are not unlimited if you are essentially treating your corporate or LLC entity as an alter ego of yourself. Now, what I mean is that you are disregarding that corporate status and you are not clearly distinguishing what is company owned, what is individually owned, what are company liabilities, what are individual liabilities, and you are not keeping your funds separate. So you need to have a bank account for the business that needs to be in the name of the business only. And you need to have all of your revenues and all of your expenses go through that company bank account and not through your individual bank account. You also need to make sure the company is properly capitalized. This means that you cannot have a shell of a company where you are essentially having no money in that company. The the business is not structured in a way where you are using it for anything except for personal purposes. And you are not treating the business as the separate entity that it is. Now, another thing you need to do is you need to make sure that whenever you're entering into contracts, that you are entering into those contracts in the capacity of you as the owner or the manager of the LLC or the corporation, and not you as an individual. So you need to make it clear in those contracts that the individual is dealing with the corporation and that they are not dealing with you as an individual. So as an example here, for Haley Gray and Leadership Girl, we are saying that she is signing this contract in the name of Leadership Girl. So that's why we got that by there. So make sure whenever you're signing contracts, you have the by with the colon, and then underneath you've got your name and your title, so that they are understanding that you are transacting on behalf of the business and not you as an individual. So cost of formation, everybody wants to know, how much is it going to cost? My costs vary depending on the type of entity, but I try to use the formation time as an opportunity for businesses to engage an attorney that can be helpful to them as they grow. So I try to keep my costs as low as possible. And these costs, of course, are going to change with time. But for an LLC, I generally charge a flat rate of $400, and that includes legal counsel on the appropriate entity for your business, drafting and filing of your articles with the Secretary of State, filing for federal tax IDs, filing for state sales and use tax IDs, and election of an S corp status if that is desired. The legal counsel is also provided on basic entity maintenance. So if you need to have annual meetings, then I'm telling you that's something you should do. Now, in addition to that fee, there's also generally a fee that's charged by the Secretary of State, and that varies from state to state. Anything from $50, $75 to $127 is the fee if you pay through a credit card online with Secretary of State. If you're a corporation, then you're required to have corporate bylaws. You're required to have initial resolutions. So you should expect that your costs are going to reach about $1,000 for getting that new corporation started. And if you're associated with Leadership Girl, associated with Haley Gray, then I'm happy to offer a discounted rate and happy to counsel you through some of these entity decisions that you're making. So we're a bit low on time. I talked a little longer than I expected. So these are some of the other issues that you should consider as your business grows. We've already discussed entity selection. Partnership agreements are hugely, hugely important. In addition, employment law. Employment law is going to be a huge liability. You need to make sure you're properly structuring your contracts with your employees. You're making sure that you're properly, clearly delineating what responsibilities your employees have and what their rights are. In addition, dealing with intellectual property, making sure that anything that you own as a company is properly protected, anything that your employees are creating on your behalf, that they are properly assigning that intellectual property to your company. An additional couple issues are service contracts, making sure that you are framing the relationship with your vendors and with your vendees, and making sure that they are understanding what the rights and responsibilities of those people are in transacting business with you. And finally, there are some big issues of dealing with financing, dealing with securities laws if you're selling shares of your company. But we'll get more into those in subsequent webinars if that's something that people want to discuss. So, questions, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And if not, then my contact information is here. You're welcome to give me a call or email at any point in time. And my website is venture, VNTURE, law, LAWNC as in North Carolina.com. There's some useful information on that website, so please check it out and let me know if there's anything else I can do to be of assistance to you. Thank you.
Hey, Kevin, this is Haley. I actually had a question come up in my mind while you were doing this. So if I am in state and I have employees who are contractors in other states, or who are employees in other states, do we have to register in those states as well?
So if you have employees in other states, then you will likely
All
will
attendees are muted and may unmute themselves by pressing star
Sorry
6.
about
sorry that the computer's talking to me. But if you have employees in other states, then generally those are sufficient contacts in order to require you to register in those other states. If you have relationships that are more than just in passing, that you are transacting business on a regular basis in those states, then you must register in those states.
Okay, great. Courtney posted a question. At what point in the year do you have to declare S Corp designation?
That's a great question, Courtney. So if you are a new business, then you can elect S Corp status. And I'm talk to the CPA about the exact date here, but I believe it's within 60 to 90 days after you are a new business. If you are a existing business, then you need to do it within the first 3 months of the new year. So again, if you are an LLC and you are treated as a pass-through entity, and then you decide the next year that you need to elect S Corp status, then you need to do it within those first few months of the year. If you're a new business, then generally you have 60 to 90 days in order to be classified as an S Corp. But make sure we verify that, and I'll follow up with you, Courtney, about the exact time period.
That was really helpful because I didn't realize that you could switch to being getting the S Corp designation after the fact.
Yes, you can, and a lot of businesses that think that they're going to be not making very much money the first couple of years, they'll operate as just a pass-through entity, and then they'll redesignate as a S Corp in the future.
Interesting. So question, what would you say is the biggest gotcha in all of this? Like the thing that tends to trip people up the most?
I would say it's probably maintaining your corporate status properly. People get lazy with the way they do things, or it's just one of those things where they get busy. And usually that's the way things happen. And then they start treating the business as if it's their own bank account. Rather than paying themselves a salary out of the business, they're essentially using the business bank account to pay their own expenses and then reimbursing themselves later on, but then they're not properly tracking those reimbursements. And if you talk to any litigator, then what the litigator is going to say is that if the company has no assets, and they're often looking to find a way to get to the individual that does have assets, which means going through the process of piercing the corporate veil. So they're going to grasp on all of these different ways in which you are treating the business as an alter ego of yourself and not as a separate entity. And they're going to petition the court to pierce the corporate veil and get to you as an individual.
Got it. So just from an insurance perspective, do you need to have like umbrella policies for the companies as well as your own?
It depends on how you're structured. If you're sole proprietorship, then yes. I mean, you need to have it for yourself. If you're a corporation, then they're going to look to the corporation, not to you as an individual. So you do need to have separate policies for the corporation and for the LLC.
Okay, got it. Cool. Thank you.
Of
Are
course.
there any other things that you can think of?
I think this is pretty comprehensive in terms of entity selection. There are a lot more issues we can go into when it gets time for discussing startup issues. I see startups running into problems all the time. But in terms of entity selection, you need to make sure that you're understanding what is best for your business. Now, I work with a lot of high-tech startups, and for these high-tech startups, for the most part, they're gravitating towards corporations rather than LLCs. And the reason why is because certain venture capitalists are not able and do not want to work with LLCs because of how they're structured. And we're not going to get too far into that. But for those people, they're expecting that you're going to have that corporate status. And oftentimes you're going to be organized in a state outside of North Carolina or outside of your other state where you live. And it's going to be often in Delaware, which is where the laws that are most well established and most well set to the point where they're very familiar with them, and their corporate documents are structured so that they can do investments very easily in a state like Delaware. So you need to understand that this decision definitely varies based on the type of business that you have.
Got it. Now I have another question. Can you switch from one type of corporation and corporate entity to another?
Yes, you can. As your business gets more and more established, it becomes more and more difficult because you're going to have to switch over all of your contracts. You're going to have to figure out what existing liabilities you have and how those liabilities are going to change when you change the entity designation. But you definitely can switch over. If you're a corporation, you've got to pass those resolutions, and you've got to have a plan of change that's being adopted by the corporation in order to switch from a corporation to an LLC, and vice versa. But it's something that is definitely very doable.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you.
This has been phenomenal. And I'll get a copy of the recording out. Thank you. I appreciate it. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording now.
Okay, great. Thanks. Have a good day.
Thanks. You too.